as those bluebells play.
I always have admired Ridley's work, even before he did did movies. He used to do commercials, so his name, the reputation, preceded him. And I knocked on his door a few times, trying to get him to do a movie for my company, for myself. And one day he came up. He had two ideas. One was, I think it was a musical about some spaceship was crashing in Jerusalem, and the other one was Legend.
The idea came because I was following, you know, would be my fourth movie, and I'd done, you know, Duelist, Alien, Blade Runner, and they were pretty exotic choices, in fact, so I'd never actually done a modern movie. And so here I wanted to get it off my chest before I then would address, let's say, a modern movie with normal modern people. I wanted to get off my chest this notion of a fairy story.
He came up to me and he said, you know, pleased to meet you. I loved you. He complimented me on a book I had written. Then he said, how'd you like to write a fairy tale? And I said, well, I would love to write a fairy tale because in actual fact, I'd been writing little short fairy tales and slipping them away in a drawer because I'd been doing so much film work and hadn't been writing fiction. I wanted to write some fiction. And I just was writing these fairy tales knowing they'd never get published anywhere. You know, they were not commercial. They were just for fun.
He said, so what do you think your target within this context of Beauty and the Beast or innocence and evil is? And I said, well, maybe it's an adventure as well, because it ought to be, all films in some shape or form should be adventures. And that usually means the good guys against the bad guys, you know, this is bringing down the fundamentals. I said, but maybe he's set a task to go after the fastest steed alive.
He basically said, well, here's what I want. You know, I want to do a classic fairy tale, and I want to have unicorns in it. Fastest steed on Earth. Fastest steed on Earth. And I want the villain to be called Darkness. And that was it. You know, that was all he wanted. So then we started mulling around, and you know, and for my ambition was that once I had this shot, I thought, oh gosh, you know, make a film with Ridley Scott. And it's a fairy tale. Well, I wanted to do something, you know, that was like going to be like classic, you know, that would have that resonance of, you know, the glass slipper, pumpkins that turn into coaches, and this Puss in Boots. And so I started like fooling around in my mind about what, you know, those sorts of things might be. And so first the Jack character, I said, well, what if there was a miller, some commoner that was in love with a princess? That always sounds like a good start, you know. And so we're sort of feeling this all out, and I just sort of ad-libbed. This was after several mornings of not getting anywhere. And I just ad-libbed this moment where I said, and what if, you know, this princess that he's seeing on the sly back of the mill, you know, he's a commoner, and what if she's teasing him and she takes off her ring and says, you know, I'm a princess and I can set this challenge, and whoever finds this ring, I'll marry them. And she throws it away and it falls into this pond, and he dives in after it. And at that moment, you know, the forces of darkness kill the unicorn, and the whole world freezes over, and he comes up and he doesn't know it. And Ridley's going, that's it, that's great. And he said, go do it.
He went away and came back with a first draft, which generally I thought was magnificent.
When I turned it into Ridley, you know, he actually called back and he said, that's it, it's a hole-in-one. And I was so naive, I thought that meant he was just going to go shoot that script. But what he really probably meant was, well, I can take this script to the studio and they'll approve it, and I can take this script to the completion bond people and they'll put up the money, you know, and now we'll start rewriting it. Because as he later told me, he said, don't you know, Guts, if we made that film, it would have cost $400 bloody million, that film. All those armies of fairies. And but I just, you know, like, you know, that's the first draft is the one time that the thing really belongs to the screenwriter, because you can more or less go in any direction you want and then hope they like where you've gone. And so basically he liked where I'd gone, but it was, you know, the honing came thereafter.
I loved it. I loved it. It was like a green light on first script. It was beautiful.
One of the things that I think is extraordinary about Legend is that it's much closer to Grimm's fairy tales, to the kind of primal psychological things that disturb children, which fairy tales were actually invented to address. Because it's not, you know, jolly fairy. It's, you know, there's some there's some really gritty, dark, bad stuff in there. The same way that there is in life. And the fairy tales were invented to prepare children for the horrors that they might encounter.
The original screenplay, which was written in poetry, was it was so beautiful. Actually, you know, never before nor since have I ever read anything that had that kind of impact on me. It was just such a, you know, looking back on that sense of wonder, because I was so young. I really still had all of that. You know, I mean, I hate to say it, but I think it's true. You go through life and that wears, and you have to work to retain that sense of wonder. But the screenplay as it was, and my 15-year-old being they were very, very, very compatible.
The original script that I read was incredibly romantic. It was high romance. It had so many elements, and I thought, this is going to take forever to make, you know. I mean, for instance, it had scenes describing how when the unicorn's feet touched the ground, as the feet left the ground, there was a ring of posies that sprung up. So as it walked, and there were flowers. You know, we never managed it, but never even attempted it. But that sort of thing, and I thought, this is really going to be magic.
Well, the Holzberg screenplay I thought was absolutely incredible. But I thought, I don't know how they're going to film it, because it would be costing a fortune. And it was worked on, obviously, Ridley and him have worked on this for a long time. We had this room with storyboards, which Ridley is a past master at storyboards. So you'd wander this room, looking at the script as well as reading it, and you're thinking, well, that's $1 million, that's another $1 million, and that's the reason certain things were scaled down, because it was just too good to be filmed, you know.
All kidding aside, this script is amazing, right? I mean, it's basically, you know, on par with, like, Lord of the Rings, in essence, and it has that much texture and detail and whatnot. So as I'm reading this screenplay, I'm thinking to myself, this is amazing! And finally, you know, it's like one of these reads where you start going, I'm forgetting I'm reading a script. I'm now in this world. I'm completely consumed by these ideas and the notions in the story, and it was quite a grand fairy tale indeed, with a cast of billions, you know. And so I get lost in it, and then I close it when I'm done reading it, and I just go, my dear God, that was the most amazing story, gripping, you know, completely great characters all the way through. I think I better read that again. It seems as though there's a million things in this screenplay. So I go back and I read it again, and I start marking it, right, for, okay, now I've got to make all this stuff. So I start marking it and sort of cataloging it and all this kind of stuff. And basically when I'm done, you know, I was right with my first instinct that there was actually so much in the film that it was going to be a very interesting conversation with Mr. Scott after I had gotten done with my read.
One of the producers, or maybe just it was a studio executive, was Marcia Nassiter. I don't know if you know of her. She was one of the first, I think she was the first female executive in all of Hollywood. And she was this tough old gal, you know, probably in her late 60s, chain smoking away. And we were in her office maybe at Fox talking about the script, and she said, well, there's only one thing I have to say about this script. And I said, yes. She said, you can't have the villain fuck the princess. So you can see how my first draft was kind of like far afield from what, you know, although it was all really there. The unicorn, the freezing over, the ring in the pond, you know, it was virtually all there in terms of the great story movements. But, you know, in the details, a lot changed.
I have no time for this. I'm going.
Oh, and you look out for Spriggan and Banshee, my girl. These woods be thick with them. Steer clear of toadstool rings and willow trees and old oaks.
Well, the themes of good and evil are very innate within the nature of the story, and therefore, by providing a forest that had to represent the organic beauty of nature and living through light and the sun. So providing one fulfills that requirement.
I thought, I want to shoot on location. So we went up to Yosemite to look at the forests up there, which are just the best, are incredible. Fir trees. Problem is, once you stand inside a pine forest like that, or redwood, there's no light. You like, with the light meter, there's nothing. I mean, you're standing there in daylight, and it's a kind of twilight, but camera-wise, you're like, you know, f.5. And so you got to light everything. You got to be really careful about lighting, otherwise it starts to look nasty. And everything is so huge, I'd have to put a scaffolding rig in there, which would be the size of the football field, to think about it, to take all my lights that won't be seen, lighting through the trees in this magical fashion.
Building this forest, this whole forest that we built at Pinewood, allowed so many things to sort of happen that couldn't have happened just in a normal forest. So you could create things that were there that you could never do any other way. I think that's the great thing about that forest was the fact that it was built, and then they put animals into it that lived in it, and it became a living forest, which was like magic because it was so vast.
Ashton Gorton built this huge, great set on the 007 stage, which had originally been built as a submarine pen for one of the Bond pictures. And it was enormous. It's the largest studio in the whole of Europe. And Ashton built this forest right to the edges and right to what we call the reds, the girders at the top. So I had to put all my lights above the girders, which had never been done before. And he also put mirrors around the back so that extended the depth of the forest, which was very clever. It was quite enormous. I mean, the trees had a girth of about 30 feet, you know, and they were built of plaster and styrofoam and stuff, you know. It was really a great set.
We carved the trunks of the trees, and then we laid real branches up into the trees like roots, and we were able to create very interesting and very photogenic woodland that way. And then within those roots we then planted ferns and real plants. So the plants were real, but the whole structure, the bones, was built and created.
It had some enormous amount, like, I don't know, £14,000 worth of scaffold tube, and it was built up slowly on rostrums, and then we filled it all in, and we had to put all the trees in, and the big trees were sculpted out of polystyrene and painted, but the smaller trees were real trees.
Then the snowing, that was simple. We just had to we blowed very fine polystyrene. I mean, now it's been replaced by something much more organic. It's a very fine paper. So we had this big, like, vast spray gun that just sprayed this stuff.
I was completely gobsmacked to see that set for the first time. And nothing that I've ever done since then has ever impacted me. I mean, it was the first film I did, so maybe it would have anyway, but just to have it, the scale, the actual grand scale of everything was sort of absurd. I mean, I know that there are films done on that scale now, but it was just awesome, unbelievable. Like an entire forest in a soundstage. Complete with the sounds of a forest, because they had, you know, about 300,000 birds in there all the time. You know, every single word of Legend was dubbed. Every breath, every single word was dubbed, because the sound was just ridiculous in that place, and just the big machines blowing chicken feathers at you. And I probably still have chicken feathers in my body that I ingested when I was 15, because it was just unbelievable, the atmospheric stuff going on. And wow, yeah, it was amazing.
There's something really special that I've been promising to show you.
Jack, do you mean it?
Only if it pleases you, Lily.
Oh, it pleases me more than anything.
Always go now, because I'll only be here for a short while.
Legend has 3 characters that have horns. that were very important, one being darkness. The other characters in the movie that actually have horns are, of course, the unicorns.
They decided before I joined the show on the type of horse they wanted, which was the Andalusian with the big crested neck and the long flowing mange, your classical sort of fairy tale horse, if you like. They'd already agreed they'd have this type of animal. So I flew down to Seville in the south of Spain, which is the best sort of area for the breeding of Andalusians. It's almost the centre of Andalusia, and started looking for horses. And I found 3 in close proximity to Seville. One is, in fact, the mare. The one mare was called Triana, which is an area of Seville. And then we went across to Alicante and various other places in Spain to get them all together. So for the 2 horses, I, in fact, had 6. They were absolutely fabulous, and it was quite interesting, because when we got to Spain, it was cold and it was snowing through the Alps, and I bought the 6 horses, so we wanted to fly the horses home. But there was, for some reason or other, some huge horse competition in Asia or somewhere, and all the containers were across the other side of the world. So we said, well, that's no problem, we'll get a truck and drive them home. And there was a French strike on, as they're prone to have in France now and again, strikes. So the whole of France was at a standstill, no trucks were moving. So I managed to get the horses from Seville up to Madrid, and then we got a truck, a big 9-horse truck lined up ready for it. You know, and if we get on the road and we've got livestock, they won't be able to keep us, hold us up at the checkpoints, because it's livestock, and that, you know, be against all sort of regulations. So we actually took a chance and set off for home, and we actually drove non-stop from Madrid to France, and met a ferry, and it was like within 30 hours from Madrid, we actually had all the horses home. So it was quite an adventure.
Ah, Blix, come closer.
You summoned me, Lordship.
Are you not the most loathsome of my goblins?
Truly, Master.
And is your heart black and full of hate?
Black as midnight, black as pitch, blacker than the foulest way.
Ridley phoned me at the hotel, and it was the first time we'd spoken, actually, since the audition and since I'd been cast. And he asked me if I'd looked at the drawings, and I said, yeah. And he said, "Did you see anything you liked?" And I said, "Well, shall I tell you what I had in my head when we met?" And he said, "Please," you know. And I said, "Well, in my mind, I thought that Blix was kind of like Keith Richards." And there was this pause on the phone, this transatlantic phone call. And Ridley said, "Oh, that's fantastic. That's it. That's it."
And Ridley says, "Yeah, you know," he goes, "Keith has a great face." You know, and then he takes out a pen and he starts doing a caricature of Keith Richards. And I'm looking at it and I'm going like, wow, that's really cool. And he goes, yeah, could you imagine if you just like extended his nose? You know, you just took his nose and brought it like way out like that. And he goes, he's got that great look on his face. And he goes, you put these tremendous ears on him and maybe bring his hair and his head back and like make his hair look like these great like cockerel feathers. And he goes, it could be really amazing, you know. And he said, I said, so what you're basically saying is take Alice, okay, and make her look like Keith Richards, right? And he says, I think that'll do it.
I was sitting having lunch one day with Tim Curry, who hadn't had the experience yet of getting into his own 5-hour makeup, I believe his took. And he was just looking at me in my makeup thinking this was really funny. But he kept looking at me thinking, boy, you look familiar. And I knew why he was feeling that, and I just made him think and think and think, and finally I said, Keith Richards. And he said, oh my God, that's it.
Foul-tasting fairy! Come to bed, juicy boy. Who needs this tender morsel? Disturbing Meg Mucklebone's rest.
The character of Meg Mucklebones, portrayed by actor Robert Picardo, is one of my favorite designs in the picture. Actually, I had worked with Picardo before on The Howling. He actually played this character who made the transformation from man to wolf.
There's a certain aspect to mask performance that appeals to me, because you are hidden. It is liberating in some way to really, I mean, I enjoyed the facet of that job of just standing in front of the mirror and seeing how expressive I could be through the makeup.
One of the characters who achieved some of the greatest film example was on Meg Mucklebones, who actually is underwater, and it was seemingly an impossible task for this person to come up from underwater in a full prosthetic suit and survive and act, and not only act but be able to breathe, and without air tanks and everything. I mean, this wasn't a diving suit, this was a full prosthetic suit designed for a character look, not to make it easy for them.
I am not only covered with rubber, then they dropped me in water. And like you drop latex rubber in water, it acts like a sponge. So I was, you know, I would get engorged with water and get very heavy. And it was difficult.
And there were multiple takes of Bob being pulled in and out of this water. Was such a trooper, because he would come out, and when he would reveal, all the water would then come out of his prosthetic and just sort of leak down through the seaweed and go back into the water. But, you know, inevitably he handed in a memorable performance, and a lot of people really remember that character. And a lot of it is because of Bob. You know, he's really good.
I am the Lord of Darkness. I require the solace of the shadows and the dark of the night. Sunshine is my destroyer. All this shall change.
As Ridley and I continued to talk about each and every character for the film, we would always come back to the most important one, which was darkness. After exploring the possibility of doing it as a griffin, Ridley then realized that it would probably be best to have an actor obviously involved in this, because there's so many dramatic scenes, and some of the best scenes in the movie are actually Darkness's scenes with the actress Mia Sara.
I thought better be sexual, very sexy, this guy. So it better be a satire, half goat, and that was the brief. And he came back with this idea of this red creature with these almost water buffalo horns.
There's been different attempts at making the devil personified in many different films throughout the years. I actually felt that none of them ever lived up to what my expectations of what the devil would be. And so this is actually probably one of my greatest opportunities in my film career, to create this character.
Darkness is a very difficult guy to cast, because his physical requirements and they're also grand, you know, dramatic, melodramatic requirements, operatic capability, and all but opera short of singing, right? And I always remembered Rocky Horror Show. And I thought, well, it's absolutely nothing to do with this. That's a brave thing to do that he did. Really brave.
We are all animals, my lady. Most are too afraid to see it.
Tim has the ability of going over the top dramatically, you know, and his abilities in terms of being a performer are so amazing, and his face is so animated. And he, you know, when you see him in Rocky Horror Picture Show, you just can't stop looking at him. You know, this guy is a caricature, right? And he's brilliant. So I was thinking, oh my God, I get to put makeup on Tim Curry. You know, I get to make him up as the devil. I said, Ridley, I don't think that this you could have anybody better.
So I met with him. He was really intrigued and said, yes, okay, this sounds weird, but okay, I'll do it. And then, little by little, he gradually realized what was going to happen to him.
And I would sort of gradually see drawings of where it was going, you know. And we had terrible negotiations about what bits of me would still be visible. I fought and fought and begged to have my own eyes.
As he said one stage, "Oh, God, you're taking my only thing left away from me. You've taken my eyes away." Because we put in these full scleroid lenses, because by the time you put all the gear on, your head goes from here to here, from here to here. So everything's got to come up. So we put in full scleroid lenses with the nurse. She's like cutting half a ping pong ball in half and sticking it in. And these cat slits, the vertical slits in the eye.
My eyes were these total contact lenses, like a sort of wolf's eyes, I mean the cat's eyes, which was fairly painful to be fitted, because basically, you know, they took a mold of your eye and then they stuck it in your eye, and if it hurt, they sort of scraped at it a bit until it stopped hurting.
Initially, it was quite amusing, actually. He would go, "Oh, God," complain, complain, complain. And then finally, I remember one day, he was, "Jesus Christ, you want me to..." And he put him in, and he stood up, and he turned, and he faced the mirror and went, "Oh." he liked the way he looked, finally.
The last unicorn dies tonight. As her blood ebbs, the sun sets forever.
First of all, I think the makeup is so extraordinary. Particularly in that it wasn't, you know, one piece that was glued on. It was entirely articulated.
Inevitably, the design of Darkness required that Tim would be in prosthetics from head to toe. That by the time he actually was in his entire costume with all the prosthetics, you know, applied to him, he would actually then put on a pair of hoofs, which meant that Tim also had to walk on incredibly long stilts. And I kept, you know, as we were designing the character, I kept thinking that the horns had to be bigger and bigger and bigger until it was finally, you know, we got them as big as we possibly could. And so from head to toe, I believe that Tim sort of measured up to be about, when he was on his stilts and to the tip of his horns, I think he was about like 13 feet or something like this. I mean, it was like a pretty amazing thing, you know, because the horns are so long and these stilts are, you know, so long, and then Tim's like right in the middle of it all.
The interesting thing about Rob is that, you know, he's not just an artist, he's an engineer, because everything, when you look at that, you think, well, okay, somebody sculpted it, but you've got to think about weight, you've got to think about ergonomics, you've got to think about how the guy's going to move in it, you've got to think, how the hell do I put two horns like that with the leverage on what? On his scalp? I can't put a helmet on him because his head will go too big. I can put it, you know, so you've got to work this out like an engineer. So you could pick each of those horns up. Those horns were ounces. They were weird, they're disarming. You'd pick them up and we'd go, oh, there's no weight. And it had to be strong enough to be able to ping something. You didn't want to, every time you touched something, it broke. So it was quite strong as well.
Once you were inside all of that stuff, it was so dazzling looking. I mean, first of all, it was pretty swell to be 8'1". And it was great to have, you know, great big superhero muscles and stuff. Because, you know, I'm not a big guy. I'm sort of, I think I'm 5'10" in the casting books, and I'm probably actually something under 5'9". So it was kind of cool to be, you know, king of the forest.
To actually to follow Tim Curry from the makeup room, you know, here's Darkness for the first time, walking with him on the gravel street of Pinewood, to enter into the soundstage of Darkness's lair for the first time, and to see what actually Ridley Scott's hell looked like, was probably one of the most thrilling moments of my entire life. It was mind-blowing. I mean, this huge, beautiful fireplace with these giant, you know, flames that would come out of it, these huge columns and the giant doors, and Tim's chair that's actually, you know, comes half alive, you know, and to see him actually enter into that, it became like one of these things where you actually were living in a fantasy, and actually give you an incredibly strange sort of ethereal feeling, which actually the movie does when you watch it.
Why is it like this? Why is it winter now?
I'd be a powerful wizard indeed, could I answer. Suppose you tell me, Jack.
Me?
You know these woods as well as any elf. Did you not see something odd today? Any strange spirits? Did nothing untoward happen?
No.
No? No.
The day the set burned down was, I would think, about 3 weeks before coming to the end of using the Bond stage, which was the big forest. We'd been using a lot of gas in there for the fire. We just finished the fairy dance. So you have a gas line through to a bonfire. You don't want to have to light it each time, and you want to control it. So you just turn on gas bottles and it goes up. Well, I think what happened is the fumes gradually built in the roof, which was 70 feet up, and the roof is 350 feet long and 200 feet wide. But it's filled with a polystyrene structure which looks like a forest. And it's filled with pigeons now, because I've been in there for weeks. And every time I turn a pigeon loose, they don't come back. You don't whistle and they come back. They go into the trees and they live up there, right? So I'm in the editing room and I hear this pitter-patter down the corridor. Somebody shot past the end like a Terry Toon cartoon, came back and said, the Bond stage is on fire. So I said, you know, basically expletive, you know, right? And carried on editing. He said, no, the Bond stage is on fire. So I walked out down the corridor, and as I got to the end, I could see over the buildings this giant column of smoke like a battleship was sinking, or an aircraft carrier. I walked up to the car park, and there's the whole fire brigade. Then there's already 3 television helicopters up there photographing it. And all my gas bottles were exploding inside the studio, so they had steel corrugated walls. So every time a bottle went, the walls ballooned. It was kind of beautiful. And the fireman said, is this yours? And I said, yeah. He said, I think you've lost it. And I said, I think I have, mate. And I went immediately, and because this is what I always do, it's like Zen, I went and played tennis. So Arnon Milchan knew in 15 minutes the Bond stage, and this was like 5 a.m. in LA. And Arnon had called up saying, you know, where's Ridley? They said, he's got to play tennis. And he said, and there's a long pause, apparently. He said, you know something? He's absolutely right.
He was so practical about it. I guess when you're directing such complex stuff, you can't let yourself get hurt or get shaken like we all were. Well, he's a tough cookie. It was weird, though. I mean, to see him, okay, you know, I guess there's nothing to do. I'm going to play tennis.
It was such an interesting sight that the being upset really didn't come into it, though we were, because we were still filming. And one of the things that saddened me was that Ridley had done a test before we dressed the set of the forest set. He'd done a test where he tracked down both sides of the set. And the set was very high. It was built like in a miniature valley and banked up on either sides. And these trees stood up on the banks with these big rooting systems, and the whole thing had a sort of twist to it to give some structure. And he had, it was probably about 20 foot up or 15 foot up, and he had, on a crane, had tracked down both sides of the set in a very, very wide lens, and it looked absolutely amazing, incredible it looked. And so I kept on saying to Ridley, when are we going to do this tracking shot? And he didn't know, he just said, oh, later, later. And of course that very morning he'd set up for that shot. And they'd set up all morning, and everything was lit, and went off to lunch, and then it burnt down. So we never got it. All I have is a copy of the test, which, despite the fact it didn't have any dressing in, looks incredible.
I could watch the smoke coming out, and it was really dark. And I said, "You see what I see, I think?" And they looked, and everybody went boom, boom.
It really was spooky to see that, to see how horrific it was, and how had we been on the set when that thing happened, there would have been some loss of life. There would have definitely been something.
I think what would have happened, it would have been terrible, because everybody would have got out the door, but the guys in the gantry would be in trouble, because you've got to get down. And the electricians would have been the one up top, where it can be 110 degrees up there, even with good air conditioning, sucking the heat out, because you've got all those lights, the heat's coming up. And the watchman it's midsummer as well, so the heat of the roof, which is metal, is hot. And so all the lights are off, you open all the doors, and the watchman, the security guard, was sitting there having his sandwiches and his thermos flask in the sun. And of course, every now and again, he's got used to it now, the pigeons are flying out through the doors. They flew in. They'd fly out, get a bit of air, and go back inside, right? So now, but the whole lot coming out now, so he says, "What the hell's going on?" So he stood up, walked in, and he looked and he said 2 pops, and saw a soft explosion on the roof, which then rolled all the way like a wave across the roof. And he ran outside, hit the call. It was too late. Fire engines came, and it must have been a gas buildup, residue gas. But the interesting thing was, all the pigeons got out. There's 250 pigeons on the fence, staring at the bomb stage burning, thinking, first of all, they build this artificial forest, then they burn it. What the hell's going on?
The picture was originally produced with 2 companies being involved, one having the foreign rights and the other having the domestic rights. And obviously, for reasons I don't now remember, there was a decision made to go in 2 different directions.
So we ended up having 2 versions of the film, and in the 2 versions we had 2 different scores. So for the US, i.e. more rock and roll, we had the Tangerine Dream. And for the European version, because I guess I was still on the fence, I really felt that Jerry's score was good, I kept that score for Europe. And there was about 8-9 minutes difference from the 2 films. The film in the US ran shorter than Europe. And I think in the European versions, or the rest of the world versions, we may have had a more extended dance. We may have had some, the dance of death with the Gump character. We may have had a slightly more extended version of Meg Mucklebones. We were longer underneath in the halls of darkness, etc. Difference is about 8 minutes.
The world lost a mini masterpiece of the time. And I just think that was down to everybody, in a way, who was involved in that film, who gave their heart and soul to it. It was a wonderful experience to work on it. And when we saw our final results, it was something to be very proud of. I just think it's a very sad thing that films are... This happens to many other films, not just Legend. And Legend has now become a legend, so to speak. But I mean, it was the same with Blade Runner before, that was never shown to the public as it was originally intended to be shown. Legend wasn't, and there's been many other things that you can think of. And I just think it's sad that they never saw this film as it was truly intended.
If I knew about movies what I know today, I probably would have convinced Ridley to fight for his original cut, which I felt was more true to his vision. Although I actually like the American cut as well, It's one of those odd cases that I think actually both work. I just don't know that we've gained anything by cutting the movie or changing the music.
It's a beautiful movie to look at, and Jerry Goldsmith is about the best film composer there is. So to take a beautiful Jerry Goldsmith score and jettison it, and then cut the movie virtually in half, doesn't sound like a good idea to me, you know. But I'm sure wiser heads prevailed. But anyway, I think that I'm sure this version of the film will convince people that Legend is really a classic.
I was shocked because I read in a couple of publications how it was the best score he'd ever done, that it was really the pinnacle of his work. And I've really been a fan of his for some time, and so I was very amazed that he got replaced. Now, I don't dislike the Tangerine Dream score. You know, it's what it is, and I like it. I like the idea of doing a classical score, though, to go along with a classical story myself. I don't like the idea of doing the test shoots and deciding out what the audience wants and changing the ending and changing things to be more marketable. I like the idea of film standing on its own, the artist's viewpoint, and letting the audiences find it.
I think for myself, because it was the first film that I had done, and also because I was so young, it was really kind of devastating, to be honest with you. It's not that I think that the version, either of them, because I've seen both the European and American released versions, were bad, but the fact that they weren't what was intended, and then the fact that they were so badly received at that time was so completely devastating to me. It really broke my heart.
I think the public could have handled the original movie that Ridley had in mind. I think that what always makes something interesting is the exception, and people are given so much sameness or things based on previous success that, you know, Ridley is nothing if he's not a visionary in the way that he creates film. So in other forces trying to put this movie into some other context, I think they compromised what might have been.
When we previewed, either it was just we got cold feet, a combination of the film, the story, and the score. I got a couple of sniggerers in the audience, and I could smell pot. Right? Now, if that happened to me again, I would actually switch the lights up and say, you get out, otherwise there's no screening, right? Because I think they can disintegrate a screening. And we screened in the DGA, I think it was. And somebody'd obviously come in and think, because I've done some pretty weird movies, so they come in and load it up with that. And they started to, there was pot and a bit of some comments happening. And I sat through it really angry, and I think it didn't help us, right? But anyway, it didn't help me because I got totally paranoid and started to say, right, the film's too long, and started to hack away at the movie, and the gentleman at Universal literally tried to physically stop me, as opposed to him saying, well, we gotta cut the movie. It was me saying, we gotta cut the movie. And he was saying, whoa, 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 you know. And so I cut the movie down to 2 hours and figured that maybe we'd been too adventurous with our expectations of a full-blown fairy story, and therefore maybe the score, combination of the score and the visual, was actually too sweet. So with only 3 weeks to redo a score, I went to Berlin and did the score with Tangerine Dream. You know, in 3 weeks they did a incredibly good job, but it was more completely different. It was a driving, more modern way to go, and given what they did in the time, I thought they did a fantastic job. On reflection, it was the wrong thing to do, and the first score was what it should be, which is what we've got on this disc.
What is light without dark? What are you without me? I am a part of you all. You can never defeat me.
Working with Ridley was always an adventure because Ridley, first of all, Ridley is trained as an artist. So he would often start trying to figure out a scene by doing these little doodles that he would call Ridleygrams. And he would like doodle out, and we would talk through a scene and Ridley would sketch them out. And they were beautiful little throwaways. I've even saved some. And they were beautiful little sketches. Well, anyway, it was always this challenge because he was always like, pushing the script in different directions. And well, at one point, he calls me into his office, and he'd been reading the script over, and so we were calling Jack Green Jack, because he was a green man. There are green man pubs all over England, and they refer to these guys that wore leaves and lived in the forest. So at this point, Ridley, his imagination is like going high gear, and he says to me, well, Gats, he says, what would you think if we made him green? So I said, you mean like with a green skin? And he goes, yes, a green skin. Now, like, my mind is like reeling. Like the implications of this are enormous to me, because it's like the thing, you change one element in the script, and so I said, you mean like a chameleon? He said, yes, exactly, a chameleon. And I said, you mean sort of lizard boy, Jack? Said, that's it, lizard boy, Jack. And so I said, yeah, well, that's very interesting, but how are we going to explain to the audience why this delicate princess is in love with the lizard boy? And Ridley goes, right, fuck me, drop it, forget it, bit rangy there, bit dodgy, forget it. And then that was it. And I left the office thinking, man, this guy is so freewheeling in the course of filmmaking that he will go, full bore in any direction just to see where it'll take him, which I thought was immensely exciting.
Working with Ridley is an exciting experience because he has this, he gives you, it's like giving you works of art to play with. The material that he shoots is always magnificent.
With the blowpipe, that. Okay. Then when I saw you advance, I could see you throw it away and change to the sword. Okay.
As a 15-year-old, I had the biggest crush of my life on Ridley Scott. I just thought he was the bee's knees, which I'm sure he still is. But so I just, I think it was very fortunate because probably if I hadn't thought he was, just the end, I think I probably would have been pissed off a lot because he's like, maybe any really good director. He's just completely single-minded and, nothing that anyone else says was going to be okay if he hadn't thought it out and made the choice himself. So there were many, many times when, there would be 14-hour setup, lighting for 14 hours, and there was more than once, and I promise you this, 14 hours to set it up. Ridley would walk on the set, and he'd say, right, turn that off, turn that off, turn that off, turn that off. Okay. And I thought the lighting cameraman was going to just really a couple times, you sort of didn't even want to look. But he's, I think he's a real visual genius, absolutely. And I think, that shows, and really, in the end, you don't mind because it's so beautiful.
I'll probably be on him anyway for that, but I'm bound to pick you up on your reaction to that as you scramble through, okay? All right? You want to just do it on film? Just do it on film. Okay.
Somebody do something very mean to me.
If you don't get it right the first time, I will. Feeling about how one feels about one's work once it's released is always, you got to go for 120%, and you usually get about 78%, right? If you go for 100%, you're going to get 44%. So I always go for the throat, right? And you have to. And because there's too many elements and people who are essentially there to help you, but the whole communication process is, even now, everything takes time. So on Legend, given the constraints, constraints of the budget, I think I should have fought for a higher budget. I think I should have had more action. And I had to cut it out because we hadn't designed ourselves for that early on, and that was our fault in prep. And somebody pre-sold the film, I think, too low. They should have gone and saying, not 25, but 30, because I think in that 5 represented all my action and rock and roll. And I think the film needed a bit of that. But on reflection, seeing it, I think it's a good piece of work, and I'm very, I'm proud of it. I'm very pleased that I did it and got it out of my system.